I'm gonna make it. I wasn't supposed to go down like this.
You have no money. You have no savings.
You're not real chatty, are you?
I don't have anything to say.
Well, you're a beautiful girl from Eastern Europe, so that narrows down the possibilities.
I'm a product of juvenile detention and foster care, just like you. I got lucky though. I had a mentor in juvie. She saved my life.
I don't want to lose you, please. I don't want to lose you either. You're gonna pass through me like a hot potato. I'm so scared. Do you think you can be my mentor?
Absolutely.
This film unfolds as a tragic, emotionally layered prison narrative that uses women's relationships, particularly between queer women, not as spectacle or provocation, but as sites of truth, recognition, and survival within systems designed to erase complexity. And when read through a queer, emotionally grounded lens, the story becomes less about crime or punishment, and more about what happens when women who have been denied safety, continuity, and affirmation finally see themselves reflected in another woman. Sometimes too late, sometimes briefly, but always with devastating clarity. Across the movie, the prison functions not just as a physical setting, but as a social pressure cooker that amplifies every existing inequality: class, gender, queerness, trauma, intelligence, and emotional need. Women here are not allowed to be contradictory, to be both capable and wounded, both loving and angry, both resilient and afraid. And the narrative repeatedly shows how institutions punish women who refuse to flatten themselves into something manageable. In Scene 3, the quiet, almost deceptively gentle encounter between prison Dr. Sin and inmate Nikki becomes one of the film's emotional cores, not because it contains overt romance, but because it captures a deeply queer form of recognition that many lesbian and LGBTQ+ viewers understand instinctively: the moment when another woman sees you fully, without fear or condescension, and names your worth out loud. Sin's clinical questions about seizures and medication slowly give way to something more intimate, but still profoundly safe for work: the sharing of parallel histories shaped by foster care, juvenile detention, and systems that failed to protect them. And this mirroring is crucial, because queerness here is not defined by physical acts, but by emotional alignment, by the sense of being cut from the same cloth, a phrase that resonates strongly with queer women who have often found family and mentorship not through blood, but through chosen bonds with other women who survived similar violences. Nikki's seizures, triggered by stress and emotional upheaval, function symbolically as the body's refusal to stay silent, a physical manifestation of what happens when a young woman is repeatedly told to suppress fear, intelligence, and sensitivity in order to survive. And Sin's belief in her insistence that Nikki is enormously bright and that this is not the end, becomes an act of quiet resistance against a prison system that typically treats women like Nikki as disposable. For queer audiences, especially lesbians who grew up navigating institutions that punish deviation and emotional intensity, this scene echoes the experience of being told, often for the first time by another woman, that their feelings are not dumb, their confusion is not failure, and their capacity for connection is not a liability. The line, "Do you think you could be my mentor?" followed by Sin's immediate, absolutely carries a weight far beyond the words, because it acknowledges a hunger that many queer women recognize: the need for guidance from someone who understands not just the rules of the world, but the cost of surviving them as a woman who does not neatly belong. Yet even within this moment of hope, the film is honest about boundaries and danger, ending the scene with the uneasy recognition that something about this connection is not right, not because care itself is wrong, but because institutions like prisons are hostile to intimacy between women, especially when that intimacy threatens to humanize those the system relies on dehumanizing. This tension between emotional closeness and structural prohibition reverberates into Scene 4, where escaped convicts Lily and Charlotte face imminent death surrounded by police, and the film strips away any illusion that women's love will be protected or romanticized by society when it exists outside acceptable norms. Their final moments together are chaotic, fearful, tender, and painfully human. They argue, they panic, they reassure each other, they repeat "I don't want to lose you" like a prayer, and in doing so they articulate a form of love that queer women have historically been denied the language and legitimacy to express publicly. There is no fantasy here, no glamorization of violence or rebellion. Instead, the scene confronts viewers with the raw reality that for many queer women, especially those marginalized by class and criminalization, love often unfolds under threat, interruption, and time limits imposed by forces far larger than any individual choice. When Lily says, "You know I love you," and Charlotte responds in kind, the simplicity of the exchange becomes radical precisely because it refuses spectacle. It is not performed for an audience within the story, only for each other, and that privacy within crisis mirrors how many lesbians have learned to love quietly, urgently, and without guarantees. The repetition of "it's okay" throughout the scene is heartbreaking, because it is both comfort and denial, a way of creating emotional safety in a world that has offered them none. And queer women watching may recognize this as the learned skill of making peace inside catastrophe, of building small islands of tenderness even as the larger narrative closes in. The film also does something rare in prison stories by centering women's emotional labor rather than their bodies or crimes, showing how Lily and Charlotte negotiate fear, guilt, devotion, and resignation in real time, and how their love is shaped by scarcity. Not just of freedom, but of validation. Lines like, "Sometimes you take what you can get" resonate deeply with LGBTQ+ viewers who have grown up in environments where love between women was framed as provisional, temporary, or less real, something to be accepted only under certain conditions or in stolen moments. And the tragedy here is not that their love exists, but that the world has so thoroughly convinced them it cannot last. The looming execution underscores a broader social critique. Prisons are often defended as necessary for safety, yet this film exposes how they function as sites of containment for women who were never offered safety in the first place, especially queer women whose emotional bonds are treated as irrelevant or dangerous. Society's discomfort with seeing women express love for each other, particularly in contexts of stress, dependency, or desperation, persists because such love destabilizes dominant narratives that insist women's primary emotional fulfillment must come from men, family structures sanctioned by the state, or solitary self-reliance. When women choose each other, emotionally or romantically, without apology, they challenge systems that rely on women being isolated, compliant, and easily categorized. This discomfort is magnified in prison settings, where intimacy between incarcerated women is often dismissed as situational, manipulative, or illegitimate, a framing that mirrors how lesbian relationships outside prison have historically been minimized as phases or substitutes rather than authentic bonds. By refusing to frame Lily and Charlotte's connection as either titillation or pathology, the film asks viewers, especially women, to confront their own internalized skepticism about women's love, and to consider how often society demands that women justify their attachments, prove their sincerity, or sanitize their emotions to be taken seriously. Symbolically, each woman in the film embodies a different response to systemic erasure. Nikki represents unrealized potential and the cost of growing up unseen. Sin represents survival through adaptation and the fragile hope of mentorship. Lily and Charlotte represent love forged under pressure, a refusal to face death alone even when the world has already decided their fate. Together, they form a continuum of queer female experience shaped by repression but animated by connection, illustrating how visibility is not always loud or triumphant, but can exist in quiet affirmations, shared histories, and final declarations whispered against overwhelming force. For women watching, queer or not, the film's emotional truth lies in its recognition of longing as a fundamental human experience, one that is often punished in women as weakness, but here is shown as resilience, as the instinct to reach for another person even when everything else has failed. The criticism prisons receive, particularly in stories like this, stems from their role in perpetuating cycles of trauma rather than healing them. And when viewed through a lesbian lens, this critique deepens. Prisons do not merely confine bodies, they police relationships, regulate intimacy, and reinforce hierarchies that make authentic connection feel illicit. By centering women's interior lives and their bonds with one another, the film aligns itself with a long tradition of queer storytelling that insists love between women is not an aberration but a mirror, reflecting back the emotional truths society would rather ignore. In the end, this is not a story about crime, nor about forbidden desire, but about what it means for women to recognize themselves in each other within systems designed to keep them invisible, and why that recognition, however fleeting, remains one of the most powerful, unsettling, and necessary forces in both cinema and real life.